designing with real data and with actual sort of production environments is just so much better than designing with static mockups. I think I have lightly felt that in previous experiences, but as you say, there is just the for anyone who has tried any of these chatbot experiences, it's the magic of the response that makes it so compelling. It's the personalization and the two-way street dialogue and how conversant it is. And so we can make 7 Figma screens where you press some buttons and the model responds, but we have just typed out what it will say. And I think that just doesn't capture the failure modes of this thing didn't do what I want, or this is kind of dumb. It also doesn't capture the sort of peeking into the curtain of the future moment, and you're oh my God, this response is really good. That was really understood me. So I think you're totally right. We're trying to just put stuff out in the world, do a lot of research, be very user-centric and user-informed, but once they have their hands on an actual working thing, not a mock-up.
Hey everybody, and welcome to How We Scaled It for Design Teams, the show that explores the journey through the arduous road of growing a successful design practice. I'm your host, Adam Perlis, CEO and founder of Academy, a UX staffing and recruiting agency. And today I have the pleasure of speaking with Joel Lewenstein, the head of Product Design at Anthropic. We're going to be covering topics like how Anthropic designs for AI, how they work with their partners to design for AI, and also how to prove the value of your design org to the larger organization. So stay tuned for my chat with Joel. But before you do, please take a chance to like and subscribe to our YouTube and Spotify channels. It would really mean a lot. Without further ado, please enjoy my chat with Joel Lewenstein. Welcome, Joel.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Joel. I really appreciate it. To give the audience a bit of context about your background, could you share a little bit about your career?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I've tried to balance two things in my career. One is I just love making software. I have this memory. I don't think it's a false memory, but maybe of the first time I wired up jQuery on a website to press a button and something happens. And there's just a magic there that I think has never really left me. On the other side, I really want to be a small part of solving some of the world's biggest problems. And for me, I like to go really low on Maslow's hierarchy. So health, safety, security, economic thriving, that sort of thing. Finding the overlap there has turned out to be really something of a challenge. A lot of the world's biggest problems just are not bottlenecked by UX. And so I think I've been sort of seeking the overlap there, and that's taken me to a bunch of really amazing places. So I started my career at a company called Good Guide, doing sort of an ethical e-commerce company. Really interesting problems, business challenges, and sort of how much time people want to spend researching the products that they purchase. I spent a number of years at Quora. I think knowledge sharing and access to knowledge is one of the things sort of squarely in that overlap. Grew with that team, saw a lot of just really interesting best practices and sort of the social web of the moment there. Left Quora to do sort of more political tech, a different angle of impact, but spent a year or two both on some smaller projects and then at a company called Hustle doing political text messaging. So if your listeners get countless fundraising text messages during election season, I'm sorry, that's something we helped popularize. And then sort of again in the tool making and knowledge access, I spent a number of years at Airtable. That was a really fun one for me because I love software. I think software solves problems and gives people a lot of empowerment. And so finding a way to sort of democratize that access was really compelling. Spent years there going with the team, the design team and company, and then found myself at Anthropic, which is just a really amazing kind of overlap of all of these things. I think AI is one of the few things I've felt in the last few years where there are massive design and user experience challenges, and it really does sort of require the most of our field. And it also maybe literally will cure cancer at some point in our lifetime. And so there's just kind of incredible opportunity there. So I was really excited to work in AI. And then Anthropic itself, I think, is a really special player sort of in that field. And so we're sort of a hybrid of a research company, a policy shop, and then a product startup. So we work on a lot of novel AI research, especially in the kind of like safety and alignment science. We work a lot with policymakers, sort of communicating what we're learning and what we think should happen in the world. And then we build a product. We have an API. We have a chatbot called Claude. And there's just a ton of really interesting stuff that I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah, I'm very excited to dive into all that. And before we do, to even give the audience just a little bit of background. I mean, you were the head of product design for a group within Airtable. Tell us a little bit about that experience leading a team. I think that was one of your first big leadership roles. I know you did a little work for Aura as well, but tell us a little bit more about that. I think our users will find that interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So, many org structures over the years at Airtable. I think the one we landed on for the last few years I was there was sort of a split. So if you think of Airtable as a software building platform, you have basically like the quote unquote developers who are actually making the apps. And then you have the sort of the end users, the consumers of those apps. And then the sort of interface it's almost like an SDK. It's almost like instead of putting out the Apple Human Interface Guidelines, what we put out is a series of building blocks, a spreadsheet-looking database, an automations platform, a bunch of UI components that these developers can sort of put together and make internal apps or apps for their customers or whatever. So I was running the design team on the sort of end user side, so the consumption of those apps, and especially sort of the particular businesses we want to go after and the sort of types of app we wanted to see created. Tons of really wonderful experiences there, tons of challenging experiences there. I think it's really fun to go through a number of reorgs. This sounds crazy as I say this out loud. In previous iterations of the company, I was leading some of the more kind of platform developer relations stuff. I started as an IC, and I built the first version of the automations platform. So over the 4 years I was there, I just saw the company from really different angles, and I think that leads to like I hope humbly, you should ask my team, but I think it leads to a really like non-parochial way of seeing your work, which is this org structure is just what fits the moment, and I've sort of seen I've seen the product and the company from all these different angles, and I think that gives you just a nice sort of different perspective. You're not sort of too wedded to your team's particular OKRs of the moment or anything. You can sort of see the complexity of what's being built in a number of different ways.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible that you had that chance, and it makes sense, like the parallel between the work you're doing at Airtable and sounds like a lot of the work that you're going to now be doing at Anthropic. How did you end up, making that transition? How'd you land the job at Anthropic?
I'm not sure I'm the best person to ask that. I was, as I said, like looking for, I think like everyone, 2023 really just showed me the promise of this technology. I was probably like a little bit late by early adopter standards to sort of really see the full potential. I think Anthropic does a really fantastic job, and I now see on the inside how much work that takes, of putting out their values in the world. And so I really care about sort of values aligned companies, and I think it's been a sort of interesting to watch over the last few years. I think a lot of employees, for really good reasons, say they want sort of mission-inspiring work. And so a lot of companies couch their business and their reason for existing sort of in high-minded mission terms. I think that's not all missions are created equal, I guess. And so I spent a lot of time really scrutinizing and really trying to understand, like, is this for real, or is this sort of a more of a employee brand and marketing thing? And Anthropic, it's real. I mean, there's a lot of like evidence in the policy papers that are written and the interviews that executives have given. So I was lucky enough at the tail end of my Airtable time to work a little bit with the team that was doing our AI products. And so I got a little window, I think, into it's interesting. I've now been on both sides of a foundational model company making an API, and then of a verticalized tool consuming that API and trying to deliver value to their customers. So I'd experienced some of the sort of agony and the ecstasy of that consumer side, and I guess that was gave me enough thoughts on the sort of foundational model side to be the right fit for where the company is at. I also will just say that maybe I'm a masochist, but I do love scaling companies. Like, I love that sort of period of hypergrowth, and having seen it at Quora and at Airtable, I was eager to do it again, and certainly Anthropic is in that mode, and so I think that might have made me a decent fit as well.
Amazing. And how big is the team that you're now managing there? Like, how do you get all this work done?
Ruthless prioritization. We have just 3 product designers right now, and hiring more. The company is growing fast. It's an interesting spot. The research and the policy wings of the company are really mature. They've been working for years. They have just a lot of process and results. And I think the product team is more nascent. And so there's joys and struggles of that, but it's a really small product team sort of compared to the size. And I humbly hope the sort of impact and recognition that we have in the world. So just 3 product designers. There was one there when I started, Kyle Turman, who's just an extraordinary individual, one of these like can do it all from branding to writing code to product strategy. And Kyle really laid down just a lot of the foundational way of thinking and some of the sort of like early patterns that we're now trying to use as fast as we can.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's a really exciting time to be joining a company. It's shocking actually how small the team is for, I think, the outsized impact and reputation that the company's been able to acquire in such a short amount of time. Tell me, like, you guys are having to solve a lot of complex user experience problems. What has really changed about the approach to product design given these new paradigms you're having to design for?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this, and I hope this doesn't sound too like I told you so, but I think instead of sort of big changes, I feel like even more militantly about things that I sort of had an inkling or suspicion on previously. I think the sort of the extreme circumstances of AI in 2024 sort of like force your hand on a couple things. So I have a list of a few. One is just extreme humility about strategy and long-term planning. I mean, I know this is the sort of like obvious property of AI right now, but it is just changing so fast, and it is like so hard to predict. I've worked in both environments. Quora had a really like kind of a short spikes, kind of not much in the way of like multi-year arcs, very results oriented, very sort of like, let's see how this early experiment goes, pivots, agility. Airtable, I think, took much more, and partly the sort of the founder's mentality, partly the business requirements, a lot more sort of like 18-month bets that we sort of stick with and we see through to the end, and then we sort of pivot on that front. I certainly wouldn't prescribe this as like every company should do this, but I think the short sprints and the reactivity is just completely necessary in this AI world. So it's a really trippy environment, to be honest. I mean, I think the like it is really, really hard for humans to understand exponential curves, and this technology, at least up until now, and we certainly think for a while longer, will be on this exponential curve. So I was trying to think of a good intuition pump on this. I actually asked Claude, our chatbot, for advice on like how to communicate the sort of like mind-bending nature of exponential growth. And this is probably a well-worn one, but if you take a chessboard, you put 1 grain of rice on one corner, then 2 grains of rice on the next square, then 4, then 8, and then go all the way through the board. There are 18 quintillion grains of rice, more grains of rice than have ever existed on Earth. So just like stuff like that, just it really challenges your ability to like know what your product needs sort of 3 months, 6 months, God forbid 12 months from now. So I think what that's led us to do is just be a lot more kind of contingency and if then oriented. We have just a huge number of ideas, a sort of like astonishing number of ideas across a really wide possibility space, rather than like sequence them out in this very like, we're definitely doing X and then we're doing Y, and I'm positive that Z will stack on top of Y. We're much more, it's almost like, I hate sports metaphors in business, but I'm gonna try one here, which is like, I think it's really more like having a football playbook and sort of like, you're almost like situationally deploying different things. So if the next generation of models have this capability, we have an amazing set of features we're excited to do. If it turns out that users like really aren't able to access this particular model capability, we have a different set of features. And we're much more sort of like reactive, humble, trying to just like see where things are going and respond in time.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like research actually provides like, take center stage here. You know, it's like you guys are moving quickly and you're not like, there's probably some amount of initial research that you forego to get products in the market to test with real people and then have them react versus like doing lots of like, research in advance to be able to do it. It's just the speed in the market's moving too quickly. So, I'd imagine that you put central focus on this as you build something, put it out into the world, test it with people and see if it's working or not.
Yeah. You've elegantly teed me up for another one of my sort of like lightly held beliefs that's now a strongly held belief, which is like designing with real data and with actual sort of production environments is just so much better than designing with static mockups. I think I like have lightly felt that in previous experiences, but as you say, like there is just the for anyone who has tried any of these chatbot experiences, like it's the magic of the response that makes it so compelling. It's the personalization and the two-way street dialogue and how conversant it is. And so like we can make 7 Figma screens where like you press some buttons and the model like responds, but we like have just typed out what it will say. And I think that just doesn't capture the failure modes of like, this thing didn't do what I want, or this is kind of dumb. It also doesn't capture the sort of like peeking into the curtain of the future moment. And you're like, oh my God, like this response is really good. Like that was really understood me. So I think you're totally right. We're trying to just like put stuff out in the world, do a lot of research, be very user-centric and user-informed, but like once they have their hands on an actual working thing, not a mock-up.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. I mean, probably, not every company or team is built this way, but it's given the environment that you're in, I think it totally makes sense to be approaching it that way. And like, what are some of the like, I don't know, new things, building for like at the moment, chat bots essentially, or chat interfaces, I should say, not necessarily bots, are, the medium for which we are interacting with AI. Are there any other mediums that you guys are thinking about or designing for that you're able to talk about or share?
Yeah. I have two reactions to that. So one is the sort of like, at Airtable, we had this really nice phrase of like, are you raising the ceiling of your capabilities or are you lowering the floor of people who can access it? And so I think you're asking about raising the ceiling and kind of taking, I think, language-based interface has just a lot of limitations. And my quick 2 cents is that it's wonderful for this sort of like opening, the free-form opening sort of like, I'm just going to brain dump all the things that I want to happen and then we'll go from there. I don't think it's as good for the sort of intermediate steps. We've spent 40 years making graphical user interfaces. I cannot imagine that like none of that is relevant in the future. So I think there's ways to layer it in. I can't talk a ton about what we're working on. One thing I personally think is really interesting in this space is kind of a little more structure and a little more kind of the prompts that you write right now are just text blobs, but really they're like system instructions plus kind of like almost like variables or input parameters to a function. And so a small company that I just found that I think is really cool is called Respell. And they're sort of taking like, you write a big prompt, but then you sort of like almost refactor out some of the inputs. So it's like, I want to write a sales email about X. You write a big complicated prompt, then you sort of package that up into like a black box that most people don't have to worry about, and you just tell it what you want to write the email about. I think that's a really compelling direction to sort of like separate out sort of what's different about each invocation of this versus like the kind of the system prompts. I have a lot to say about the sort of lowering the floor, but I'll pause there for a minute.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting. One of the things I've been thinking about is a lot of design leaders are either being asked or going to be asked in the next year to start integrating AI into the products, services, tools that they built. And I think some of them are very well versed in the tooling that exists today. But I'm curious, like, you guys have a big task ahead of you beyond, of course, the tools that you build internally for consumers to go and use, or even prosumers to go use. How are you thinking about integrating with some of these companies and helping them, traverse this gap in knowledge about how AI can be applied inside of their businesses?
Yeah. We do a lot of that, and I think we're maybe doing it on two fronts. One is just sort of understanding where the opportunities are. There's a lot. I mean, there's sort of improving the products that you're making. There's actually like putting it into embedding this text interface into the UIs that your customers see and kind of improving their experience. There's also like internal efficiency and sort of tools for worker happiness and sort of the way that you're actually like as a company functioning. There's opportunities in both. The second half is prompt engineering, which is still this kind of dark art of this space. I think if you want to do a separate hour on like whether or not prompt engineering will be a skill of the future, we could probably do like an interesting roundtable on that. A lot of strong opinions there. And then I think really understanding like the limits of the technology, the strengths and weaknesses of the technology. That's maybe where the overlap is. So, it is really hard to separate sort of future possibility from current capabilities. And I think companies are looking to both set themselves up so that when future models come, when there are more capabilities, when these things kind of are improved, they're well positioned, the integration paths are smooth. But also if you're going to put something in front of customers, it needs to like be really good and work and like deliver real value. And so striking that balance. So one sort of example that I really like and I think is indicative of some of the stuff we do is we work with a legal company called Robin AI, and they're helping sort of contract review go faster. Contract review takes a really long time. Lawyers, highly trained, highly paid lawyers, spend a lot of time to sort of like combing through details, taking like the human desire for something to change in the contract and finding the place in the contract, changing the language, etc. So Robin, using our API, has built this really nice sort of sidebar inside of a text editor. You can kind of make general changes. You can ask questions of your contract. You can sort of start to make changes. And they've been able to get, I think, a 10x improvement on the amount of time that lawyers spend like with a contract. A lot of really interesting technical details there. I think one in particular is Claude, the model that we make, is really good with handling long context windows, like long documents. And so there's a really nice example of taking kind of one of our areas of technical strength, marrying it with like a very clear pain point in a customer's life, and sort of like finding this overlap.
Wow. And do you guys actually, it sounds like you even create some partnerships, strategic partnerships, or there may be particular clients that you work with even directly to kind of consult and help them learn how they could integrate your technology. Is that right?
Yeah, that is right. Yeah, we're trying to do both. So we have a wonderful sort of sales and go-to-market team, and we do have resources for some of our customers. We also want to put this out sort of in a more democratized way, and make this kind of a general skill set. And so it's a little bit of a little bit of both.
Yeah, self-service and a little bit of hand-holding as well. That's fantastic. Yeah, it's it's a really amazing the type of work that you guys are doing, and also the approach you've taken. You talked a little bit about accountability, and I know that there's some things with constitutional AI that you guys have been putting out, a lot of research focus. Can you talk about those different parts of the business and like how they kind of are helping you guys, push the business forward?
Yeah, I can a little bit. So yeah, so we the mission, the goal of the business is to create safe and reliable AI. I'm certainly not the expert on all of the details there. One thing that we've done that I think is really fantastic and sort of guides a lot of the rest of our work is we've put out something called a responsible scaling policy, which is essentially like pre-committing to safeguards that we will hold ourselves to, and we hope others hold themselves to, as the models get more and more powerful. So we do a lot of work on our current generation of models to make sure that they're safe and reliable and sort of adhere to the values that we've embedded. We also want to think ahead, and obviously we think that the part of the value that we bring as an institution is the kind of the foresight and the technical understanding of where this is going, and starting to sort of drive a broader conversation. Like I mentioned, we're pretty active policy shop as well. We're working with a lot of other players in the space, trying to sort of help set standards both for how to be safe with this current generation, but also think ahead and sort of pre-commit to some things so that when the world changes as fast as I was mentioning before, we've sort of done some pre-thought about what safety means.
Yeah, and I know I've spoken to Christopher Reardon, who was previously at Meta, and then now I believe is at Google on one of the responsible AI teams. And one of the things he brought to light was this concept of like red teaming. And so my understanding is that the red team is like meant to kind of go through all the worst case scenarios. Is that something that you guys like either have a team responsible for, or maybe it's even your team that ends up being responsible for kind of working through all the really bad scenarios and figuring out how to address them?
Yeah, I probably shouldn't comment on any of the specific techniques that we use. I think that responsible scaling policy sort of outlines like the types of concerns. I think what's really interesting about this space, and I'm just kind of purely speaking for myself here, is like there's a lot of different types of concerns that you might have, right? There's sort of there's accidental misuse. There's sort of the financial fraud and sort of like more scammy stuff. And then there's obviously some of the more like alignment and sort of agentic AI stuff. We try and have sort of safeguards against all of them. I think our RSP does outline at least some of the techniques for folks who are interested, but probably that's the best resource.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think that's a good point. I think a lot of the teams out there who are starting to integrate AI, and I think we've seen, some of these examples where there's definitely like a few memes I've seen out there where somebody starts to, interface with, a bot that really sounds human, but then they realize that it's a bot at some point in the conversation, and then they get mad, and then they start to like tell it to do bad things, and the bot complies. And so I think a lot of, obviously this technology is still evolving and improving over time, thanks to companies like yours. And, now that companies are going to start to integrate some of these tools into their own, service suites, they'll need to also be thinking through the red teaming, right? Because if they don't, you guys are building for everyone, right? They're building for a specific group. And so they'll need to probably help give input about that or customize their tooling to help fix it. So I think it'll be important for those leaders to really think through that part too. Like, not only are they meant to be product design leaders for their company, but they need to also think through the implications of AI and how it impacts their user base and, humanity.
Totally. Yeah. So our research team put out a really interesting thing a few months ago that I think is very relevant here. So you mentioned constitutional AI. Just in brief, that's essentially a way of training an LLM where you have a sort of a set of values and principles. So we based ours largely on some of the kind of UN human rights principles, as well as some of like the kind of Apple privacy policy and a few other things. Again, all public. So definitely encourage you to read about it. That resulted in an AI that we were really happy with and had a lot of the safety and reliability properties we wanted. But the obvious problem there is like it's just one constitution, and that constitution was written, consultatively, but by a comparatively few number of people. We started a really interesting project in the fall of getting, I believe we call it collective constitutional AI, where we actually worked with a kind of public polling firm to collect a bunch of values and inputs from citizens of America about what they would want to see in an AI, and then we did the same training run. So I think there's a lot of really interesting possibilities there, and sort of if you think of the constitutional AI work as like partly our view of what safety means, but also partly a technique in which one can take a set of values and train an AI against it, that opens up some really interesting, again, sort of democratization and customization opportunities for companies or institutions or people that have different sets of needs.
Absolutely. And to kind of wrap things up, I want to ask you one more question, and, you may be able to answer, you may not be able to, but, you guys are at a pretty pivotal point for any, I'd call you a startup, even though, you're kind of starting to grow beyond that. But the company's moving so fast. Given your team is the size that it is, how do you start to think about scaling? Like, what are the first steps? And like, what's the plan? There's a lot that you're going to have to undertake in the next year, probably.
Yeah, I ask myself that almost every day. There's so many different ways to think about how to scale a team and sort of different lenses you can take, and somewhat alarmingly, they lead you to like very different answers and team structures and types of people. I really like an almost pretty basic sounding one, which is I really like to just anchor ratios to engineering and to product engineering. I don't know what all the teams will be working on 3, 6, 9, 12 months from now, but I know we want small, tightly knit EPD trio teams that are working on a problem, that are shipping software like we talked about earlier, like putting things out in the world is like the best way to learn here. And so in terms of sort of scaling the product design function, at least, I'm just trying to really map one-to-one to where engineering is going, and those numbers are something we talk about a lot. Also, building out user research, I think that's a really important one. And as you said, like there are so many unknowns about this world that we need to be sort of investing in that early and finding ways to just like learn really, really rapidly. So those are my two main focus areas in terms of team scaling currently.
That's great. That's a great insight. I haven't really thought about, kind of mapping the eng team to the product team, and it sounds, and the design team, especially in terms of ratios, because, the way it sounds like your teams are structured, especially since they do need to move so fast, is, you've got at least one member of each of those teams in those pods, and they're going and attacking a particular problem set. And I think it's a good way to kind of refer to it. It's like those ratios. So yeah, cool. So I want to pivot to another really important topic. With the rise of AI and its ability to make our jobs more efficient, one thing's for certain: design teams are definitely getting smaller. So how do you think design leaders can continue to prove their value to organizations?
Yeah. It's a great question. So I think one really good sort of value and series of decisions we made at Airtable was just trying to optimize for cross-functional credibility. I think there's always a tension as a design leader of sort of how much do you focus inward on your team and how much do you focus kind of externally on partners. Not that they're always mutually exclusive, but we tried really hard, especially in the hiring phase, to just bring on sort of low ego, high collaboration, high productivity people. I think that paid dividends and that we had a pretty low like designer drama quotient, which is helpful for credibility. One thing I ask myself, this is maybe a slightly spicy way of coming at this question, but I think about like the happy hour test of like when you're out with your cross-functional peers as a design leader and you're outside of like your weekly status meetings and everyone's had like one or two drinks and they're like, come on, Joel, like level with me, like what is going on with your team? Or like, I've always wanted to ask you this question. I hope it's not rude. And then they sort of like, they give you the real talk of like how you're perceived cross-functionally. And I try and take that stuff like really seriously because some of it is fair, some of it isn't, but it's the perception that's like in the org. There's a bunch of tropes. I'm sure this will like trigger a lot of design leader PTSD. The first one that I hear all the time is just like design is slow. Like design is just, it takes a long time. I think there's some merit to that. And my experience has been like designers care a lot about craft and not as much about like cycle time. I think it comes with experience. I think more senior designers just like work faster. But I think it's a really important thing to instill in designers of every level. And I also think it's a thing that design leaders like really have leverage over because you're seeing work periodically and you can ask things like, what's the next checkpoint here? When's the next milestone? Like, okay, what if we did this a week earlier? What if we did it 2 weeks earlier? Like, I think there's a real ability to like make change there and sort of combat one of the pernicious, but maybe not entirely untrue stereotypes about design teams.
Yeah, I think that, anytime you can provide also metrics to help support your case, and also, squash the haters. If people are saying you guys are slow, have the data to back it up. And it feels like, in this world where, yes, design teams are getting smaller, and we as, leaders need to kind of justify, the team sizes that we have, anytime we can add data to it to back up our case is going to be very effective at supporting it.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And then I as I've thought about that, I usually think about basically like hitting OKRs, right? You like the classic way to do this would be to say like, the company wanted to achieve X percentage growth in a metric, and the design team contributed to that, the project that ended up hitting those metrics. I think there's the thing that I probably have thought of less, and I think where this kind of speed things come from is just a sort of internal ROI and throughput and output. And if you sort of think, if you think from an executive's point of view of sort of like, I'm putting a bunch of humans against this problem, and like out comes product. I know it's a sort of a cold way of looking at it, but that is how businesses run. I think just like the speed with which product comes out the door, even if some of it moves metrics and some of it doesn't, you're learning faster, you're sort of like more reactive, back to our earlier topic of being like agile and learning quickly. I think it just, it's good for the business independent of the sort of like, top line KPI movements that might happen.
Yeah, I think it definitely brings me back to a subject I've talked a little bit about, which is like, design leaders kind of need to be business leaders too these days. They need to understand about KPIs or OKRs. They need to be able to look at metrics and understand them and apply them to their work. And it's kind of like they talk a little bit about getting a design MBA. I think that there's definitely a lot of merit to that. These are in the classic design schools. I don't think these are things that they teach you. I'm not a design school graduate. I was luckily a business school graduate, so I learned a lot of this stuff. But I don't know that everybody acquires that type of knowledge and information. They kind of got to learn on the job and figure it out. But yeah, feels like a paradigm shift, if you will.
Definitely. And I think at least I end up spending a lot of my time sort of as a translation layer and sort of saying like, this metric, I think there's a sense that, top line metrics can be sort of cold or inhuman or sort of not capture the je ne sais quoi of what we're making, the sort of like the spirit, the soul of what makes design. And I think a lot of what design leaders do is connect the dots there and say like, look, we're not measuring soul, but I think we all have this belief that if there's soul in this product, it'll make people use it more, it'll make people pay for it more, whatever we need to do, that'll move the numbers. I think there's a sort of like a cultural mismatch sometimes between like hitting your business numbers and what designers often take pride in their work. And I think a lot of what we do is bridge that gap.
Yeah, totally. There's got to be a balance. I mean, I think if a leader were too metrics driven or focused, they may lose sight of what the end goal is here is to, build a great product for their users. And if they don't consider, the business parts of this, then, well, they may be out of a job. So it's gotta have that healthy balance. I think that's a really fantastic point to end on. Thank you so much, Joel. I really appreciate all your thoughts. Looking forward to hearing more of them. Where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much. I'm a longtime listener and first-time guest, so I appreciate you having me on. For the Anthropic related stuff, Anthropic.com sounds obvious. We publish a lot of our research, a lot of our thinking about sort of AI safety there. So definitely recommend that. For me personally, my website is joellewenstein.com. I write the occasional blog post there on a lot of these topics in design and AI. So would certainly be very honored if folks wanted to just find me there.
Amazing. Well, thank you again so much for being here. We appreciate it. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, Adam.